Hi, and welcome to Making Student Feedback Actionable and Meaningful. This is being brought to you today by Grand Canyon University's Canyon Professional Development. And I am Dr. Crystal McCabe. I am a full-time professor here at the College of Education here at Grand Canyon University. I have a doctoral degree in industrial and organizational psychology, along with 2 master's degrees, one in professional counseling and one in special education. And my bachelor's degree is in psychology. So as you can see, I have a love and passion for anything related to psychology and education, and anytime we can put those 2 things together. And so even with feedback, that is something that is really important in how we give feedback to students, the importance of giving feedback and the ways that we can do that. That all has to do with also that whole education piece, but also the psychology of it. How does it make people feel and how do people react to those types of things? I spent 16 years in the field of special education teaching. I was mostly K-8 up until the point where I came over to the university, where I have been for the past 9 years. But in special education, I have done full inclusion, co-teaching, all the way down to students who had been removed from their home school due to the severity of their behavior. And I was providing self-contained services to them at a alternative type setting. In my spare time, I'm also a licensed associate counselor, where I provide counseling to a small caseload of individuals, and I have been there for the past 11 years. I am a wife and a mom to 2 boys, and then a mom to 2 fur babies, our rescue dog and cat. So it's a little bit about me, and I'm excited to be here with you today. So I really enjoyed this quote. I thought it really summed up a lot of things about what we'll be talking about today. But to get us started, psychologists tell us that in order to learn from experience, 2 ingredients are necessary: frequent practice and immediate feedback. And so that's really what we're talking about today, the actual idea of providing this immediate feedback to students and giving them those opportunities to actually practice skills and so that they can master things and move forward. So our goals and objectives today, we're going to talk about the importance of feedback, teacher perceptions of feedback, student perceptions of feedback, ways of providing feedback, and then making feedback actionable and meaningful. Because we want to give feedback like a boss. So why is feedback important? So here we have some research where it's actually been done that's discussing that feedback is one of the most effective teaching and learning techniques that puts out a direct impact on both teaching and learning process that has an immediate impact on the process of acquiring knowledge. That's exactly what we're doing here as educators, and it's what we want to do. So how do we do that? It helps our students understand, it gives clear guidance on how to improve. What do I need to change? It helps improve student confidence because if I know what I need to do to be better, then I'm going to feel better about what I'm doing. Improve student self-awareness. So I'm not just walking around thinking I'm doing okay. When you're providing feedback to me, I actually know if I'm doing okay. And then it makes students excited. If I know I'm on the right track, I'm very excited about my learning. So here is a question to post. You can pause the video. If you're by yourself, you can jot down some notes. If you're in a group setting, you can talk to your partner or your neighbor or someone in the group. But what is your perception on providing feedback? So here are just some thoughts of others' perceptions of providing feedback from the past. Just some different participants and stuff in this type of topic, but different things that they thought about it. Pointing out, some say boo. Maybe it's the least favorite part of your day. Maybe it's the longest part of your day, providing that feedback. Grading those papers, actually helping the students not in that real time moment in that grading of being able to provide that feedback. But as we can see here, we know that it's essential, it's critical, it helps students grow. We also know some things about it too, that it should be timely. But sometimes it might feel really repetitive. Do you find that you're giving the same feedback to everybody? Is it just more for time management's sake that it's just easier for me to copy and paste, the same feedback to everybody? So what are students' perceptions on feedback? What do they think? So many of them think it takes too long to receive. And so we know that this is a really big struggle for us as educators because it takes a long time for us to actually provide it. We think about grading papers and how long that can take for us. And so we know that this is one thing. We know it's important. We also know that, especially with kids, we have to have that turnaround time and it needs to be timely for them to actually associate the feedback with the actual stuff. So it's the same thing even with behavior. If you have an action, a behavior that takes place, but I don't provide feedback to you for a while, an hour. I give the example, but when we were growing up and stuff, sometimes dads, and this isn't my perception, but in many ways, society kind of made dad seem like dad had to be the disciplinarian in the family. And so you would see families where the child acted up and then they were told, wait till your dad gets home. And so by the time dad gets home hours later from work, the child may have long forgotten what they had actually done. And so the punishment or the consequence wasn't really attached or associated with the actual action or what I was doing. So we want to make sure that when we think about feedback, whether it's academic or whether it's even behavioral, that it follows in a timely fashion with the actual work or the actual event. Because the longer it takes, the more I will have struggles as a student associating them together. Sometimes the feedback's difficult to understand. Maybe it's written. Maybe I can't assess what the tone of the teacher is in the writing. Maybe I'm not certain what they're talking about. Maybe the language they're using in the feedback doesn't match. Sometimes you might have somebody say something very vague, like, this is a poor thesis statement. What does that mean? How do I change it? Sometimes, so it could be very difficult. The student may not understand what the feedback means. The students enjoy and prefer audio feedback. Um, and it really can depend on the type of learner the student is. Some people are more visual, they want to see it. Maybe they want to see the track changes or the example or the red pen. Not too much red pen, but maybe they want to see red pen where it's corrected and they can say, oh, that's what it needed to look like. Oh, I understand now. But they prefer that audio where they're talked through. Maybe you record yourself looking at their paper and they can hear you giving your direction of what they need to change or do. The other thing about audio is we can listen to it again and again and again and again, and we know about repetition and how that's important for learning. Video is easier to understand. So again, between that listening piece and also seeing what it is that the teacher wants me to do. I don't understand how to do this math problem. Oh, okay, I see it now. My teacher is showing me. I actually can see where I made my mistake or where I did the wrong, operation when I was answering the question. And then video creates a stronger connection with the instructor. Sometimes that's important to them. In some ways, like we have our classroom full of students, and so we can't always give that individual attention. But if I make video feedback for my student, it feels much more personal. That this is my time that I've taken out to be able to help the student to understand what needs to change or what they're doing well too. So here is a video that you can use the QR code and watch, but it's actually discussing a little bit further that importance of feedback. In the video, they discuss the 3 stages of feedback. And so we have what's called stage 1 or feed up. So it's really that preparation stage of the assignment, that we're having the student do. Where am I going? What are they going to be doing? What are those expectations? What are those goals we're setting for what the student is going to be doing? So we have the feed up stage, and then we have the feedback stage. So that's the part where, how am I going? How's this, the reflective piece? Am I doing this right? And we have our students who ask those questions, right? Am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Can you look at my paper? Is this correct? And then we have the feed forward, which is this 3rd stage of what's next. And this is that part of helping to make our feedback actionable so that we are now in this feed forward stage where we're helping the student to move forward with their feedback and what they need to do to make changes. So in that feed up stage, again, we want to set clear expectations for the assignment. We want to make sure that the students know exactly what they're supposed to do. And if you do use rubrics can be very important. It makes it very clear to the student, this is what I'm being assessed on. These are the different components that must be included in my assignment. Maybe you use a template, or maybe you have a general template, maybe you create a template for the assignment. But that really helps students to know exactly what those expectations are, and then also doing those checks of what questions they might have, so it's very clear. Then the students' understanding of the learning objectives and the goals, they know what they are supposed to be doing. And so they can feel confident in this feed up stage about what it is that's expected of them. So pause the video and think to yourself, how do you provide feedback? Maybe this is something that you reflect on by yourself, or if you're in a group or partner, you can reflect with them. But how do you provide feedback to your students? So here are some ways of providing feedback. We have our text feedback that might be done. If a student writes a paper and submits it, we might have a comment box that where we, track changes, things like that. Maybe you put a note at the end of an assignment. That could be whether it's submitted online or whether it's submitted hard copy in front of you. Maybe you just put message or email with feedback on the project or the assignment to your student. And then you might have audio or visual type feedback, where you might have some sort of software that you use to record that feedback. Some examples include Loom, Vimeo, Screencast-O-Matic, or Screencastify. Some of these programs have free versions, some you have to pay for, but remembering to take advantage as a teacher for some of the free programs that they have. I know Loom has a free educators program. So if you sign up with your educator email, you're not as limited, and you can actually provide as many videos as you would like to be able to provide that video feedback to the student. In addition to that, we can also upload our videos to YouTube. That could be for storage purposes. It could be to make sure we're providing captions for our hearing impaired students who might need those captions on the video, or sometimes just people in general enjoy having captions on their video. But those are some different things that you can do when providing that feedback. So we've got the text written feedback, we have the audio visual feedback as ways that we can be providing feedback to our students. So in that stage, that feedback stage, we want to ensure a few things are taking place. We discussed already the importance of it being timely. If you don't turn my paper back to me for 2-3 weeks, and I'm already expected to have to be working on certain other pieces of this project or a whole other assignment, you're guaranteed that I'm not going to have made changes because it took so long. So we want to be able to try to make sure that that feedback is timely, that there's a quick turnaround part with it, so that I can learn, make those changes and adjust, and be moving forward in the right direction. You want to personalize it. Again, we want that connection with our student. So we want the student to feel like it's theirs. And so using their name is very, very important in providing feedback to them. So then I know you've not just copied and pasted. Maybe you have. I mean, as a teacher, I teach a lot of students at once. And so a lot of that feedback sometimes is similar. And so there might be feedback where I have links to help them with different things, because many of the students, struggle with a certain piece. And so I can copy and paste some of that feedback, but putting their name on it helps them to think, this is for me. So we want to personalize that feedback to them. We want to notice specific things. Okay, so be specific. Notice specific things about their work. That also helps them to know that this is mine. But we want it to be actionable. So it's not just like, hey, good job. Good job on how thorough you wrote this description. Good job on writing out how you solve this problem, and help them to know. So when you do this, or, with this problem, it looks like here, you wrote the incorrect number down. And so be careful in the future. You want to make sure that when you are writing, try to keep them, together, try to write neatly, try to have enough space. So you have those actionable pieces for them, so that you don't mistakenly put the number in the wrong spot, or the wrong operation. Help them to know what they need to do next so that it becomes more actionable. Some additional ways, and there are definite critics to this, but just in general, whether it's academically, whether it's behaviorally, whether we're just chatting with our friends and family, it is important sometimes to be able to provide that feedback sandwich. And so what that looks like is often starting off with a compliment. Then we have our correction, the things that need to change, and then ending on a compliment or something positive. And so the reason that this is helpful, and kind of going back to remember at the beginning I said about that psychology piece, is a lot of times, even when people just tell you, like, get to the point, I just want to know what I need to change, it feels nicer when we acknowledge that it's not all bad. There are things that you've done well or great starting places for stuff. Because if I just start in on all of the complaints or all of the feedback about what you've done wrong or all of the things that you have to change, that's a real letdown to a person because your students are trying to do their very best. And what you got, while you might be reading it and think, ugh, this is terrible, you have to remember that, the heart of that child and how they thought they were doing well, and this is maybe the best that they can do at this moment. And so you have to think to yourself, I don't want to be putting a child down, because if I put a child down, then they're going to feel defeated and they're going to think, I can't do this. And so why try? So they're not going to have actions that make them want to do better. They're going to have actions that make them shut down completely and not want to do the work at all. And so that is where this kind of becomes important. So I might start off with, wow, you wrote 5 paragraphs. That's exactly what I expected of you. You met that requirement as far as being able to write that the link that was needed. When writing your paragraphs, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to transitions, because we don't want this to all feel not connected. So we want our paper to feel connected. So we have to go back and we need to focus on the transition between each of those paragraphs. This is a great website you can go to for additional things, or here's a video on transitions. Again, I loved your ideas. I love the way that you brainstormed all of those pieces, and it's all coming together. You're on the right track. Once you get those transitions corrected, it's going to be perfect. So again, I've complimented, I've corrected, told them what to do, the actions, the steps that they need to take, and then ending again on a compliment. That just makes people feel better. And when you do that, they're more likely to actually want to make those changes. So here's some real examples of people doing feedback sandwiches. As you can see there, they're kind of connected with their different Post-its, but the heart Post-its were those compliments or those feel-good statements we wanted the student to have. And then we have the correction that we're looking for them to make. And then again, ending on that compliment. Here's another example, kind of displaying that feedback sandwich again. So you can see here, Elaine, thank you for your submission. I really like the way you discussed this week's topics. Next time, try writing a more clear introduction. Be sure to mention all the topics the essay will address, as well as have a clear thesis statement. Then here's a video where it's actually discussing a thesis statement and how to write it. Let me know if you have questions. I'm only a message away. Your content was spot on. You did a nice job, mechanics and citing. So again, there's that compliment. Start out with the nice things that they did well. Here's the little correction that needs to be made, what we need them to do, what to include. Here's some assistance to help them know what they need to do next. And then again, ending on that compliment. So there are several different types of feedback that people can provide. You have your oral and written feedback, informal, formal feedback, descriptive and evaluative feedback, peer and self-assessed feedback. Let's take a look at these different pieces. So in oral, written, informal, and formal feedback, you can kind of see here, in the photo how it's depicted. We know oral feedback, the verbal feedback, it could be in class discussions, those one-on-one conversations we're having with students. It can come from their peers, it can come from you as the teacher, but that anytime it's that verbal feedback, I know, and that can be academic or behavioral, but just, hey, great job, hey, you're on track, way to pull your book out in time, way to come to class prepared. We can give that feedback all the time verbally to the student. In that written feedback, we kind of discuss some of the ways that that takes place. It's on the work that they've submitted or they're being assessed, drafts. It could be in emails. I know some people use different software like Remind, things like that. So it can kind of almost have a text feature, but you can have written feedback in different ways. We have the informal, which again can be in that class discussion, group work, shared work, class spaces that they might be in. But this is more of just kind of that check-in, the walking around the room. Am I doing this correctly? That quick like thumbs up, that more informal feedback. And then we have the formal feedback, which usually is the grades. It's more of that summative type feedback where those corrections are done, everything's been turned in, assessed, and we provide a lot. This is more, the formal feedback is much more time consuming for us as the teacher. Then we have our descriptive or evaluative feedback. So being very specific in the form of either written or conversations that we have with the student, very specific standards or goals we have for them in order to improve. Going back to that piece, like the example I gave about transitions, being very specific about what it is that needs to change and how to do it. Whereas that can take place during, it can take place at the end, but it can also take place during. Evaluative feedback is usually more towards the end. It's more of the summary piece. How did you perform on that particular task? What is your final grade on this assignment? You look at that type of feedback, that evaluative feedback, and that's usually more of that ending piece. But we also want to be specific. So examples of that included like, hey, good, excellent, the check plus type of thing, or this needs improvement. We do want to work on making sure that when we are giving evaluative feedback, that it is specific. It is descriptive of in addition to being evaluative for them. Because if you put all this work and effort in and someone just writes good job on a paper, I mean, sometimes that feels good, but it's like, wow, it's almost like when you write a really lengthy text to a person and they say, okay, or a thumbs up, and you're like, wow, I expected more of a response. I spent all these hours on this essay and you just wrote good job on my paper. Some students are not going to be very happy with you on that if that's the type of feedback you give them. We can have peer or self-assessment type feedback. So self-assessment, this is when the students are actually learning how to assess their own work. And so with this type of feedback, this is important that you teach them actually how to assess their work. Make sure, again, that whole feed up piece where the student actually knows what it is they're being graded on. So maybe that's part of your process. Maybe you actually give them the rubric that they're being graded on and have them grade it themselves and see what they would do. I know I had teachers in the past who would actually say something like that, like, what grade would you give yourself? What grade do you think you earned? I know that was really hard for me, and maybe think about that yourself if you ever were in that situation. But when a teacher, would say to me like, hey, what grade do you think you deserved on this? I always struggled. And even though I did really good work, I always struggled with giving myself an A. That felt like I just couldn't do that. And so this might be something that your students would struggle with as well. So this is definitely something to think about if self-assessment is a type of feedback you're going to do. I always felt like I could have done better. There's more I could have done. And so A seemed like it had to be perfect. And I wasn't certain that anything I was doing was perfect. And so that could have more to do with the child's self-esteem and actually less to do with their ability. And so be careful with that. And if you've been in that situation, maybe you can relate to what my experience was with it as well. Sometimes there's those self-assured people though, who are like, I did perfect, A plus. And then you probably remember there were some teachers who actually gave that as the grade, whatever you wrote. And that was wild to me. But I had a professor in my undergrad, and I'll never forget, she wouldn't give A's. She said, A's are for perfection and nobody's perfect. And so I was supposed to feel better about the B plus that I got in her class because she said, well, Crystal, just think that would have been an A for any other instructor. Cool, thanks. My GPA really appreciates this. So thinking about those assessment pieces and how it's done and what that means and what it means to actually get an A. Maybe you have examples when you're helping students to self-assess. This is an A paper, this is a B paper, this is a C paper. So they can see and kind of feel like, oh, where does my paper, where does my assignment fit? Then we have peer assessments. This is when our classmates actually start assessing, the work. And so we see that all the time, exchange with a partner, we're going to grade with each other, or assess with each other. We know that this can be subjective. Hey, that's my friend. Maybe I slyly correct it for them so they get a better grade, or, depending on how you're going to check it, if you're just going to check the score or things like that, it may not always be accurate. So we have to think about those things too when we're assessing. One of the stories that I share is about my husband and, a time when they were peer editing another classmate's work. And he had caught that his classmate had plagiarized, and just the pressure that put on him about, do I actually tell on my classmate, or mark these things wrong, things like that. So think about the pressure that peer assessment could put on another student. So all of these things kind of have to be thought about before we just want to implement these different types of assessment. So something that you might want to do, and something I've done in presentations, is provide a feedback gallery walk. And so what I did is I kind of put posters around a room. You could put posters, in a conference room or something, things like this, something you can do to practice, or just on your own. So we think about generic feedback in general that's sometimes given. So for example, the answer is incorrect, the solution's incorrect. Or I might say, explain more. That might be my feedback. What are some ways that I could make that statement more meaningful and actionable for my students? And so these here that you're seeing are actual real examples of a gallery walk, to just kind of say, okay, instead of saying explain more, what could I do differently in my feedback that makes it more meaningful and actionable? Good job. We're all guilty of saying good job. What else could I say instead? This next phase, or this last phase of feedback, is considered feed forward. So again, we want to be in that direction of moving forward. So how do we help students to see opportunities for growth? That's what this feed forward is. So this author, Joe Hirsch, he's actually done a lot of stuff on feed forward, but one of the things that he has come up with is this thing called plussing. And I thought this was kind of a cool word. And it's something really cool. It's a cool action. So basically, he discusses how we don't put ideas down. We can't shoot an idea down. So in a class setting, there's no bad ideas, right? Like we can't shoot the idea down. We can only expand or add to it instead. And so that really gets you thinking a little bit differently. And so this is that, okay, this isn't a bad idea, but what if we take it and we do this, or we add this to it? And so this is another way that we can help the students for it to be more actionable in moving forward. We also want to focus on specific skills. Have you ever gotten a paper and you honestly could have used that red pen or the track changes if it was online and just wrote all over it? That's not going to be very helpful. It'd be very defeating as a child to get that back. So sometimes, and it's time consuming. I mean, you're almost rewriting an entire paper in some situations for a student by providing all of that feedback. So sometimes it's good to just focus on a specific skill. So maybe on this assignment, I'm actually just looking for word choice. Sure, there's lots of other, feedback that could be given, but we're just focusing on word choice this time. Okay, give it back, let the students make changes and stuff. All right, this next time we're only focusing on transitions, but focusing on a specific skill, also making it known to the student what we're looking at. That way it helps the student also know this specific skill. Again, I mean, as a student who wrote a dissertation, I remember again how defeating that could be sometimes, looking at all of that feedback because it was all of the feedback at once. And for me, sometimes I would have to tell myself, only look at one comment at a time. I'm not going to look at the whole thing. I'm just going to look at one comment at a time. Fix that, take a few deep breaths, maybe move to the next comment. But it is good to focus just on very specific skills so it's not so overwhelming for you or the student. Make plans to make change achievable. So again, we want our students moving forward. We want our students to actually have actions that help them to correct things. So we need to actually plan for that. Is it a reteach situation? Is it new material I can provide to them? Is it links to tutorials and things that will help them? What can I do in providing that feedback for them that it's actionable, moving them forward to help them achieve it? This piece here, the importance of tone. So if we're not making audio and visual feedback for our students and we're just doing track changes or comments or handwriting things into, the paper itself or the bottom of a page, we have to think about tone, because since I'm not saying it, the student is going to just read it in their head. And we all know in general, we tend to kind of go negative in our own head. We read something and we typically react to it negatively. So we have to kind of have that idea in our head when we're writing, because we want to make sure that even if it's written, that our tone is pretty clear. It gets very misinterpreted. I mean, you can do activities and stuff like that with your students, have them take a sentence and read it with different types of tone, because that's all the things that take place when a student can be interpreting written word. Watch for sarcasm or negative tone, especially in audio too. We want to make sure that while we're recording ourselves that we keep that, neutral tone while we're giving stuff, or if we're really excited about a compliment we're about to give a student, to make sure that we say it, because it's not going to sound as good if I say, "Good job on your paper. You have met the assignment requirements." Like, it's very neutral. So we know that there's definite times when we want to show excitement and things like that in our actual audio tone, but also when we're writing too. So ways we can do that. So again, here, this whole "you have met the assignment requirements" or "good job," going back. Sometimes that, is not enough for students. And so I give that example because think about it. If you wrote or did a paper and this was your feedback, "You have met the assignment requirements," how would you feel? Some of you may be thinking, "Awesome, I met the requirement, moving on." But some of you may be wanting more. And we have students of both of those natures. So we do have to think about that when we're providing that feedback. So for audio and visual feedback or video feedback, here's a Loom link that you can look at, and there's the QR code for it. But it actually is a video of someone at Loom who's going over how to make audio and video feedback. So if that would be new to you to provide it, that's something that you can do. So that is a Google extension. And again, if you use the educator version, it's free. And so I can quickly get a paper. I can quickly, click my little icon, and I can actually begin recording, sharing my screen, showing the students how to do something, or showing their paper and showing where, things are where I need some changes made. The minute you're done and you hit stop, it actually copies the link to your clipboard. You can hit paste, send it in an email, send it in a remind message, attach it to the student's paper, put it in your learning management system, whatever it happens to be, and it's done. And you're providing that student then with that audio video feedback. And so it can be done in a timely fashion, even if you do have a lot of students. But this is a great video to help you kind of see why and how to use Loom to provide that to them. So how do we know if students actually saw it? That's the thing. We spend a lot of time as educators on providing feedback, especially when we're grading assignments. How do we know that a student saw it? I know for me as a college professor, that's something huge. I put a lot of time and effort into that feedback. What if they don't even look at it? And I remember I was teaching English, one of like the beginning writing courses, and they had a rough draft. And then at the end, they had to submit a final paper. I would spend hours providing feedback on those rough drafts, only for some of them to submit the same thing at the end. It was incredibly frustrating. And so I know, and then what does that do for us as teachers? We feel defeated. And so then I'm not going to spend that kind of time providing feedback. So when we are providing feedback to a student, we want to make sure that they actually are seeing it. So some of the ways that you can do that, if you use Loom, it actually sends you have notifications. So you can get an email when the student receives it and watches it. Sometimes with Loom, there's the ability for students to actually comment during your video. If you want to have an ongoing dialogue with the feedback, and you receive notifications when a comment is also made so that you can check it. This is a great way for me to assess it, because if a student came up and said they had further questions or things like that, I could say, well, I noticed you didn't watch the video I made you. Oh, okay. Oh, let me go back and do that. Perfect. Great. You took the time. Make sure they're actually seeing it and, watching it. Something else that I used to do, and this could be if you're doing written feedback or typed feedback to your students, I would include like a secret message or a secret word or a question that says, okay, once you've read this feedback, go back and tell me, send me a message with your favorite color. Obviously, that quickly let me know what students didn't read the feedback, didn't open up the paper or look at all my track changes or all the effort I was making to provide feedback to them. So that's just another tactic that you could use to actually ensure that your students are watching, reading, all of those things, your feedback. I really liked this quote, and it probably, was kind of more near and dear to me as the special ed teacher, the heartstrings there. But the best way to give students writing feedback depends on the student. What that student's intentions are, how motivated the student is, what that student wants in the way of feedback, and what that student most needs at this moment to move the writing forward. What I loved about this quote is that it just reminds us the importance of it being individualized. So some students are okay with just good job, you met the requirements, and they can survive on that. They can move forward on it. They're more self-motivated, and so they don't need all of that reassurance from you. They don't require all of that feedback. But some students need a little bit more. So maybe they need it in writing, maybe they need it visually to see. So really getting to know your students and their individual needs for that feedback. I mean, even as a teacher, when I was working with instructional assistants in the classroom or paraprofessionals in the classroom, I would ask them because sometimes I had to give them feedback. How would you like to receive it? Do you want me to write it? Do you want me to sit down with you and have conversation about feedback? How would you prefer that to happen? And so this can be something that you also do with your students to actually see what their preferences or their needs are. And today I'm going to end with my favorite teaching video. If you've not ever watched the Rita Pierson Every Kid Needs a Champion video, this is something that you need to do. And if you've watched it, watch it again. It is so very, very important. But actually in this video, and the QR code's there that you can watch it, she gives an example of feedback. And so I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but take the time, watch the video, and see if you can find the example of feedback that she gives in this TED Talk and what you think about it. Because going back to the very beginning, what did it do? What did that feedback provide for the student? Did it help move them forward? Did it motivate them to move forward? Or did it crush their spirit and make them, not want to make change? So go ahead and take some time and watch that and think about it, and put this in your saved document so you can watch this video as many times as you need to, because it is just uplifting to that teaching heart. And that's the end for today. So think about what some of your takeaways are from the presentation, things that you're going to do when providing feedback, maybe something new that you want to try in providing feedback. There's so many different ways. But take some time and think about what you plan to do to make sure that you're providing more meaningful and actionable feedback to your students. Thank you.